So we should have interpretation enabled, we're recording, and we have live transcript. If you could go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's our agenda for today. Thank you again for coming and taking the time this afternoon to learn more about the proposed Copa program. We will give you a chance to introduce yourself in the chat as we introduce ourselves by speaking out. That would be, for our staff, that's what we'll be doing. We are having the chat open today. We've had it in a different format in the past, so we're trying a new format based on your feedback. So we're going to have the chat open throughout the presentation. We will close it if there's any use of profane language or any type of inappropriate behavior that's going on in the chat. And it can be distracting for some. So, we do appreciate if you keep your the comments in the chat relevant to what we're talking about here today. So as we go around the room here, we'll have staff introduce themselves. If you'd be willing yourself to go ahead and put into the chat your name and if you're affiliated with an organization. So you can go ahead and start doing that. And I will pass it over to Josh to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Josh Ishimatsu. I'm with the City of San Jose Housing Department, and I manage our policy team.
Thank you. Kristen?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Kristen Clements. I'm a division manager in the housing department. I oversee policy and our commission work, and I'm happy to be here today. Thanks for being here. And I can turn it to Asen.
Hi, folks. Happy New Year. Asen NZI. I'm the partnership for the Base Future Fellow here in the City of San Jose's Housing Department. I work primarily on the preservation policy, including this Copa program. Nice to see so many familiar faces. I'll pass it back to Elizabeth.
Thank you. So what we're going to do today is go over where we are in the process, give it an overview of the draft framework, and then we'll go through element by element and take your questions. Again, I had talked about the chat. If you'd be willing to put questions into the chat, and then once we get to the question and answer portion after we've presented the overview of the draft framework, if you could use the button on the bottom of the screen, the reactions button, and raise your hand and we can call on you. So go ahead and keep those introductions coming as we move along here. We can go to the next slide. One more. So here's where we are in the process. So in September of 2020, the City Council approved the citywide residential anti-displacement strategy with specific direction to explore Copa. So that is what we've been doing. Since April of last year, now we're in a new year, we've been having a robust engagement process. We've had a stakeholder and a community engagement process that incorporated feedback from realtors, brokers, small apartment owners, building owners, property managers, lenders, affordable housing developers, tenant advocates, policy organizations, and community leaders. See many familiar faces here today. Thank you to those people here who have been through with us throughout this process. Overall, we've engaged over about 160 people in 15 meetings. And so where we are right now is we have a public review of the draft framework. We've had that out since December, and we're having that public review open until the end of this month. So I'm wondering if somebody on our team could, or I can do it actually, I'll just drop it in to a chat here so that as we go through this draft framework, if you prefer to just look at the draft framework itself, you can do that. Let's see if I can grab it here. And then coming up in the winter or spring, we have Housing Commission and City Council Committee meetings. So let me go over here and grab that. So you have that. Now we can go to the next slide. I'm sorry, I'm having technical difficulties here. There we go. Okay. So what we want to do today is give you all an overview of this proposed program and bring everyone up to the same level of knowledge of this proposal. So we're going to try to get through a description of the entire program proposal as all of the elements fit together, and then we're going to open it up to questions for the second half of the session. If you have any questions as we go, like I mentioned before, please don't raise your hand yet, just make a note of it, or you can type your question into the chat and then we'll answer those questions in the second half of the meeting. So thank you for your patience and working with us as we get through this program description. Next slide. So we'll start out with a definition. So, the proposed community opportunity to purchase program gives qualified nonprofit organizations an opportunity to make the first offer to buy rental residential properties before properties are put on the open market, and the right to make a final offer to match terms and conditions of a third party. Note that this program would not require the sale of a building to a qualified nonprofit. The only requirement under this program would be for the owner who is going to sell their building to go through a prescribed process. Who the owner ultimately sells to is up to the owner. Next slide, please. So there are several reasons why we are proposing this program. The purpose of Coppa is to prevent displacement and preserve existing low-cost housing. Properties purchased by QMPs through Coppa would be preserved as restricted affordable housing to the extent that they qualify for city subsidies that keep rents low. Coppa would be a way to give tenants greater opportunity to gain knowledge and participate in the process of their building being sold. Buildings could either be rented or could be eventually converted to home ownership opportunities or other ownership structures that would promote wealth building. Next slide, please. So opportunity to purchase programs generally have similar program elements. So starting with applicability, that's what type of units would be included in the program. Timeline for transaction, buyers, in this case, qualified nonprofits and community partners, income eligibility and targets, tenant engagement, and education and enforcement. Next slide, please, and I'll pass it over to Asen to talk about applicability.
Hi, folks. Thanks again for joining. For some folks, I recognize some names. You might have heard about this multiple times. For us, sort of present this multiple times, but I think we're going to go ahead and start back with the basics. And that's what kind of properties in the city are going to be included in this program. We did a lot of research and conversation and community outreach around kind of the concerns that folks had around what properties would be included, but also looking at what does our current housing stock and where do folks currently live in the properties and where are folks experiencing the most amount of displacement risk. And so what we found is that about a third of the rental properties, I should emphasize, rental properties are single family homes. About 13% of the properties are 2 to 4 units, and then 5 and above is 54% of the properties in the city. What that means is that essentially, if you're going to include 2 and above, you're going to be including the vast majority of the rental properties in the city. At the same time, we heard a lot of concerns for folks who happen to own a single family home and are worried about what that means if they happen to sell it, that could create potentially an undue burden for folks who own single family homes. And so we kind of landed on including as many properties as possible, while at the same time making sure that we're cognizant of the concerns that folks had about single homes. What we know is that for a lot of cases, a lot of people owned properties that they live in that happen to have extra units, and they wanted to make sure that they're able to sell it without to go through this Coppa process. And so owner-occupied properties would not be included in the program. We also know that folks had really serious concerns about being able to pass on properties to immediate family members, and sort of what that meant for intergenerational wealth. And so we're making sure that family transactions, especially with direct family members, would be included. There are specific different processes, usually because of legal processes like bankruptcy, foreclosure, divorce, or eminent domain. And so those kinds of cases would also not be included. And then in some cases, a lot of properties, some portion of the ownership will change, but the majority of the ownership would actually not change. And so that would not trigger an actual overall majority sale, and therefore those properties also would not be included. Next slide. So before I go over this timeline process, I just want to clarify something. I know there was a facsimile, a version of this chart that was published in San Jose Spotlight recently. That was an earlier version. Just want to make sure that this is the actually updated process chart for the timeline process. And what timeline just means basically is like, what would the process look like for folks who own multifamily properties in the city and are putting them up for sale? And so the first step would be, just like the current process would be putting the property up for sale. And so what we're asking property owners to do is to send a notification that they're intending to sell. And that notification would go out to a number of qualified nonprofit organizations that Josh will be talking about in a second. And they will get a certain amount of time to be able to put in a statement of interest. And basically all that means that they're interested in looking into that property a little bit more. If the property owner does not receive that statement of interest initially, that essentially ends the Copa process for that property owner or for that property. If they don't receive that initial statement of interest from the qualified nonprofit, they can go ahead and just put that up on the open market. And that right there, the process just keeps going as it is currently. What we know from existing property markets where there are opportunity to purchase programs, 90+% of the properties usually end right at that first step. Once the property puts up that notice of sale and does not receive a statement of interest letter from the qualified nonprofits, it just goes over on the open market. If the property owner receives a statement of interest from the qualified nonprofit gets a certain period of time to do some initial due diligence, just to see if this property sort of matches the kinds of properties that they're looking to purchase. And then they get a certain amount of time to submit an offer. The owner has a right to refuse or accept that offer. If the owner refuses the offer, the owner can just go ahead and go out into the open market and secure a bona fide offer from a private buyer. All we ask is that they give the qualified nonprofit that put in that initial offer the opportunity to match that offer. But the owner is in control and they can still decide whether or not to accept or reject that final offer from the qualified nonprofit. And so all the terms are matched, whether or not the price is matched, or even in some cases, if the price is surpassed, the owner still gets the choice to accept or reject that offer. Obviously, conversely, that also means that if the qualified nonprofit makes a better offer than the private buyer, the owner can choose to accept that offer and sell it to the qualified nonprofit. In many cases, what we hope happens is that in the initial offer, the qualified nonprofit makes a really good offer that's backed up with enough financing that they're able to make a strong offer that the owner accepts. And then they give them some amount of time to be able to secure financing and close that transaction. Next slide. And so we also know from the research that there are kind of multiple markets for multifamily properties. There's the smaller properties, 2 to 4 units, where properties usually cost less overall, and they sell much more quickly just because, of course, there are more buyers for properties that are smaller and cost less money. And so we just decided to try and make sure that the process for smaller units was a lot more streamlined, and went a little bit more quickly, to try to make sure that we're keeping sort of within the realm the market currently looks like. And so after that initial notice of sale, the qualified nonprofit would get 15 days to put in a notice of sale. They would get 25 days to do that initial due diligence and put in an offer. And then if the property owner accepts the offer, all we ask is about 60 days so that they can secure financing and close the transaction, which we understand matches the existing amount of time properties usually take to close. If the property owner rejects the QNP offer, the qualified nonprofit would get just 1 week, 7 days to be able to match that private sector offer. One thing I'm going to put right really quickly with these days, that it doesn't mean that every single day has to be taken. These are just maximum days within the process. All of these processes and timelines can be truncated depending on what individual organization is. Next slide. For larger properties, obviously, we're talking about much larger amounts of money. And what we know is that currently in the market, larger properties are staying on the market much longer than smaller properties. And so we're thinking about just making sure we're matching the initial steps. So you still get 15 days from the notice of sale to put in a statement of interest letter. You still get 25 days to do your due diligence and put in that initial offer. But what we know is that there's going to need to be a little bit more time to be able to, make all your financing lined up and are able to close that transaction. And so we're asking for a few more days, 40 more days to be able to secure financing and close your transaction. But other than that, it is the same process as for the 2 to 4. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Josh to talk about qualified nonprofits.
So qualified nonprofits for the Copa program, for the nonprofit organizations that will get the opportunity to submit early offers on properties before they go to market. We want to make sure that these organizations have the capacity and know-how and to close a transaction and develop and manage a property. So we want to ensure that organizations who receive this benefit are nonprofit organizations with the specific mission to provide public benefit through affordable housing, have experience and track record to be able to complete the transactions and run the housing. For these reasons, the City of San Jose will have an application process, and we will pre-qualify organizations based upon these factors: their nonprofit status, their mission, and their track record. Both what they've done recently and their overall experience in developing affordable housing. Our recommended development experience requirement is for qualified nonprofits to have completed 2 publicly funded affordable housing projects in the past 5 years, and 4 projects overall, preferably projects of similar size and scope. In addition to this real estate development, this affordable housing development track record, we also want the potential Copa buyer to be rooted in San Jose, to have its mission to advance justice and equity in San Jose, to be committed to empowering tenants and to have a track record with direct engagement of tenants, and to be committing to serving all. We understand that not all nonprofit affordable housing developers will meet the above criteria, so a QNP partner can partner with a community organization, a community partner, to fulfill these requirements. These requirements can be met either through a joint venture partnership or through, with a community partner, or if the nonprofit developer meets all these on their own, of course they can do it as themselves. Like with the QNPs, the city will pre-qualify potential community partners. It is also our intent to provide technical assistance and capacity building to community partner organizations about the development process and how to be engaged partner. Oh, I'm on, jump to slide. So affordability. This will be a program requirement that QMPs have to follow if they end up purchasing a property. So for rental properties, we would have income eligibility guidelines that would be 30 to 80% of area median income, which is an affordable housing sort of term of art. But this would be for low income folks to very low income folks. With a portfolio goal overall of 50% AMI. This portfolio goal is not a strict requirement that we impose on all QMP developers, but it'd be something we'd monitor across the entire portfolio of projects that we as the city would fund and use our funding to adjust income tax targeting through incentives in our application if appropriate. For home ownership, we'd require that income eligibility be targeted to 60 to 120% AMI. So this is sort of low to moderate income. In both cases, for rental and home ownership, because one of the fundamental purposes of Copa is to prevent displacement, existing tenants will not be evicted on the basis of their income eligibility. This was a strong consensus that we heard through our community engagement process. So when a QMP purchases the building, if the building's existing tenants do not fit within the income range of the program, they would still be allowed to stay. For tenants whose existing incomes are below the range, their rents would be adjusted to be 30% of their monthly income, to be affordable at their current income, or they would stay at their current rents, whichever is lower. And for tenants whose income is above the income guidelines, the tenants would either keep their current rents or their rents would be raised to an affordable rent, 30% of their monthly income, less utility allowances. So I will go to the next slide and pass it to Kristen.
Thanks, Josh. So one of the good parts of this program, we think, as compared to just funding preservation in our market, would be that we would ask the qualified nonprofits, we would require them actually to be in touch with tenants so that it is alleviating the stress that tenants can feel when they know their building is going up for sale. It is a destabilizing event. People realize that the rents may be going way up and they may not be able to stay. And so one of the pieces of this program would be a requirement that a qualified nonprofit that is qualified for this program and or a community partner local to San Jose, if that nonprofit developer is not from San Jose, that together that they make an effort to communicate to the tenants during the period of the property acquisition and then afterwards, and to give the tenants more knowledge and to help involve them ongoing and support them ongoing. This is not to say that this is not subject, especially in the early stages, to what the existing property owner's desires are in terms of contacting residents. We know some building owners are very reluctant to have their tenants contacted during the time that a property is being listed and being sold. So that QNP and community partner would have to adhere to whatever the building owner would want. But what we would be looking for is a pledge that during the time that they would be making an offer, basically, that there was an effort to reach out to the tenants to inform them of, hi, this is who our firm is. This is what we would be trying to do. We would be trying to turn this property into restricted affordable housing, and what tenants can expect. This is not to say they have to reach every tenant, but that during the transaction, we would want them to be able to evidence that they did make an effort. And after, if an offer was made and the owner accepted the offer, and then they were in the due diligence period during the transaction, that's the time when, of course, part of the due diligence is figuring out who are these residents, what are their incomes. That's something that any acquiring owner would want to know more about to make sure that rents can be paid, and in this case, what levels rents should be set at so that they can be right-sized, as Josh indicated. So during that time, we want to see evidence of communication going on with residents. And then after acquisition, we would want the QNPs to support tenant associations being formed, make sure that they were providing information regularly to them, having policies where tenants were aware of what rules they were subject to and how they could, for instance, make reasonable accommodation requests. So there are certain guidelines that best practices we would like to see. One more thing is that one of the conditions, if the city were to come in with subsidy later, either upfront or later, that probably would be a condition of a loan agreement, is that this qualified, but we'd figure that out, exactly where their condition would go, but that this qualified nonprofit, that the acquiring entity would agree that if the tenants, they may not have been ready to make an offer themselves up front when the original owner was selling. Like in some markets, folks might have been ready to do that. But as we get more support in our market for tenant engagement and tenant organizations to form and be aware that they can do things like that and organize, we would want the existing nonprofit purchaser to give tenants, be willing, if their lenders are okay with it, to give the tenants a first right to purchase, a first shot at making an offer within a qualified window. And if they choose not to exercise that, the tenants, then they would go forward with a different plan to sell the building under Copa. If they decide to sell the building, they would also be subject to Copa later on. So that's the tenant engagement piece of this, we think would really support our efforts to try to support tenant engagement and knowledge sharing and development of capacity over the long run in our market. Next slide. Finally, part of the program is how will we run it? How are we going to make sure everybody knows about the program? And then how would we enforce it, seeing that we are not proposing that this is a voluntary program? And so, big picture, we are proposing a long period before which the program would become effective. And during that time, we would be collaborating really closely with stakeholders in our market to do widespread education and outreach. We know not everybody would be aware day one that there was a new process in place. And so we really would want the outcomes realized from this program, and really, because many owners only have one building to sell, it's a one-shot deal. And so we know how important this initial outreach and communication is in the market, and would have to occur in multiple languages. So we would spend that first approximate year before implementation having staff working on outreach with stakeholders. And while we were developing more detailed regulations about definitions under the ordinance and things like that. And by the way, qualifying an early group of qualified nonprofits so that when the effective date comes forward, the program was ready to go. So in terms of enforcement, we'd be taking an administrative enforcement approach. And because this kind of goes hand in hand with a very small staffing level, we anticipate perhaps 1 FTE on this program. And as there are thousands of transactions in the market, they wouldn't have much bandwidth to proactively investigate and make sure procedures were being followed properly. They'd be responding on a complaints basis saying, I think that this is up for sale and I'm not sure that the process is being followed. And so an administrative approach briefly described as what those bullets say, which is that if someone is found not to have followed the proper process, they would get notified with a letter saying, not sure you knew, but we've got this ordinance and this is the way it's supposed to go. If that same person or owner had a second offense or continued to not follow the ordinance during that same sale, and it was known, then they could become subject to a fine, which would be small at the beginning. So this kind of administrative enforcement, we would pattern after other city programs, such as code enforcement, such as the tenant protection ordinance, that the administrative guidelines, we can point folks to what those look like and the fee schedules that are associated with them. So it'd be very analogous. We would be just looking to follow what the city typically does in programs like this. It is possible that an owner that had multiple buildings to sell, for instance, who knowingly was informed of the proper things to do and just pretty much knowingly decided I'm not going to follow the rules, that they would open themselves up to fines, enough to get their attention. And so I read the other day that the last fee schedule I could find is that the fines could go into the thousands for someone who was knowingly violating the ordinance. So I think it was 10,000 is what I saw. So that would be the severe penalty. And again, some stakeholders have asked for specificity during this period, and we will be providing links to the analogous other administrative guidelines. And so the other piece of this, though, that comes along with the inability to kind of proactively work with people on the front end to make sure everything is followed, is that we would permit third-party claims to be brought by, for instance, a law firm out there that thought that they had a legal case that somebody could bring, that somebody who was knowingly violating would open themselves up potentially to litigation. But again, that is really a bad actor situation. That is not an average kind of like, I just had no idea kind of situation. So just want to be clear on that. I want to emphasize our desire is to get the objectives of the program met first and foremost. We do not want to spend anybody's time pursuing bad violations. We don't have time for that. We want to get some more affordable housing. That's the goal for the program, and stabilize some residents. That's what we're here for. So that is our approach, and I would turn it back to Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. Thanks, Josh and Ethan. So now we're going to have time to get your questions. So thank you to those people who have been putting questions into the chat. You can continue to do that. You can also raise your hand. I see Marnie has her hand raised, and we'll just kind of toggle back and forth between getting your questions by you verbally speaking them out or through the chat. So again, you can keep those coming. We can go through element, we have the next set of slides is the kind of a repeat of the slides where we go element by element, and we can put those up just, so there's background, but I also put in the chat a link again to the draft framework if you'd like to look there, at the details. So we'll go ahead and get started with Marnie, since you had your hand raised first. If you could speak your question out.
Thank you very much. I have to say that listening to this presentation, I was struck by the fact that you said that a qualified nonprofit will have needed to have sold 4 houses, at least 2 in the last years. And I gotta say, and this is a comment, not my question, but I have to say that I don't think that's sufficient experience. I'm a little bit gobsmacked that you guys do. And I'd like to know how you came up with those qualifications. But then I guess that is a question. But I also want to know if we know that SB 9 has just started, will rentals that are created under SB 9 be subject to Copa? And then the last question I have is, are non-rent control rentals subject to Copa? And I'll mute myself and let you respond to me. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Marnie. I'm wondering, Josh, if you could answer the first question in terms of how the qualifications for QMPs was decided.
Sure. In coming up with a list of qualifications, I mean, we looked at what we do for our own applications for, housing funding affordable housing, new construction mostly. We looked at what the state does through its tax credit programs and through the state HCD, Department of Housing and Community Development. We talked to a lot of different affordable housing lenders. And, this level of experience is in line with what we see, as sort of like the minimum level of experience for most affordable housing programs.
Great, thank you. And I'm wondering if Kristen or perhaps Josh can speak to the SB 9 question, how that interact with the.
I can speak to that.
Could I first add to what Josh said for a quick second? And thanks, Marnie, for your comments, and thanks for being here and engaging with us over time. We are trying to balance the idea that we are trying to grow more local nonprofit organizations that want to do development work over time, and not make the track record requirements so onerous that they would never be able to reach it. And yet adhere to what most other lenders would do. So we're trying to be reasonable and kind of cut the path in the middle. Josh, SB 9?
Yeah, SB 9, I mean, we have not put this question to our attorneys yet, but how I think it would go is that any property, it doesn't matter how the units were entitled to be there. If it has 2 or more units that don't meet any of the exemptions, so not owner occupied, not being transferred to a family member, etc. If the property is 2 or more units, and it is a rental property that does not meet any of the exemptions, it doesn't matter if the units were built under SB 9 or under any, under existing zoning, if they were built a long time ago, if they're built now, it shouldn't matter. Copa would apply.
Okay, thank you. And then I think Marnie's last question was about renter protections under Copa.
Yeah, I can comment on that. And I think Cheryl had that question too. And actually, Cheryl, I wrote you back an email not long ago. Sorry, I couldn't get it out earlier today. The renter protections, we anticipate that the buildings purchased under Copa would be subject to the just cause eviction protections under the tenant protection ordinance. The mechanism of how that happens, we're still figuring out, but that's our intention.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's see I think we had a question before. Ruth, I see your hand up, but I think I'll take a question from the chat from Catherine that was asking about sort of the parameters of tenant associations. Sounds like she had an experience where it wasn't as she expected, and it sounds like the question is like kind of what parameters there would be, if any, from Copa to tenant associations. So Kristen, maybe you would know that, or Ethan.
I mean, I can go ahead and start. I think that's a good point. So we would want to see the encouragement of both informal and formal tenant associations. As you know, tenant associations can get incorporated like co-op boards or HOAs, but even informal meetings and tenant associations that you see in a lot of affordable housing projects. I think the experience that you had, Catherine, is something that we would obviously try to figure out a way to avoid, and that means potentially setting up some standards around tenant associations as part of that receive Copa program funding. That could be something that we develop as part of the program guidelines. Also, I would want to see potentially a role here for community partners to help try to solidify and support tenant associations so that we can avoid these kinds of situations. Kristen or Josh, if you want to add more.
No, I think you stated it well.
Okay.
There's a lot of work to do in our market around tenant associations and tenant organizations. So we see this as something that's supportive and very consistent with other objectives and other things that we're working on.
Great, thank you. I can pull one more question from the chat and then we can get to Ruth's question. There's a question about the affordability and why it would start at 30% AMI. Josh? Would you be able to answer that?
I could also answer that.
Go for it, Kristen. I can add in.
I think Kalisha had asked this. We talked about this actually in the working group before. What should be the area median income? What should be the income levels of the folks targeted for this program? One of the challenges is that, frankly, preservation properties like this can be expensive to purchase. People who are in the audience who buy, who own properties or operate them know that this is, this is a challenging endeavor, right? To buy expensive properties and run them efficiently. And one of the things that we have to think about also is whether there are rental vouchers available for folks who are at the extremely low income level. If somebody had a rental voucher that really, increased their income effectively, that would really help the economics of a property. But given that many of the properties purchased under this program could be something like 15 units or 25 units, to have too many extremely low income units in the property means, and these properties also don't qualify for low income housing tax credits, in which there's a equity investor that just puts cash into the deal up front and then gets a portion of returns over time. It means that all of the cost needs to be funded by debt. And just in short, I'm going too far into the finances, sorry. We think that more properties, we should be targeting properties, income levels that probably don't assume that somebody has a voucher there. That is not to say that the housing needs of folks who are between 12% of area median, which I think is the last time I checked SSI, that's what it worked out to be, and 30% of area median. That is not incredibly important. It's just not the target for this for the product. That said, if a building were acquired and somebody in it happened to have that kind of income, the project owner the new one would have to figure out that pro forma, because one of the important tenets is that you do not displace anybody. right? And so, and that the rent gets right-sized. So we're not going to kick anyone out, and we're not going to make them pay 50% of their income either. So we'd have to figure something out. But regularly serving somebody like at 20% of area median income means we would have had to assume rental vouchers were commonly available for the program, and that's just not true, unfortunately. Hope that helps.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I'll go ahead and call on Ruth if you could unmute yourself and speak your question.
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of comments and then I have a question. First of all, this practice it goes against every established ethical business practice. Just look at the purchasing policies of the city of San Jose. No one is allowed to share a bid with another bidder. No bidder is given special privileges to extend the bid or to have access to the final bid. The city can't violate their own practices and policies in purchasing for a select group. To compel a private property owner to allow special privileges gives them an unfair advantage against every other person in a capitalistic, competitive, open market process, which is governed by a lot of established real estate law. Even real estate agents cannot share the buyer's bid. The only person that gets to see the end bid is the agent for the seller. So that is very, very wrong. You're creating new business policies and practices. Nothing restricts this QNP, who we don't know who will be or what policies will establish who qualifies. Nothing now prohibits them from purchasing a piece of property. Nothing. The city is not a mortgage banker. The city is not going into the business of lending money. The city cannot go ahead and do these under a policy. When you describe this, you say the program's voluntary. Then when you got into the slide that says, how will you enforce it? You start to refer to it as an ordinance. An ordinance is a law. So my question is, if you purport to put this unethical, unlegal policy forward, does the voting public, the taxpayer, whose in lieu money is going to be used for these purposes, do we get to vote on this? Thank you.
Hey, Elizabeth, I could address a couple of Ruth's comments. And Ruth, thank you for your carefully thought out thoughts. I can tell that you had organized them ahead of time. So please tell me if I miss any, because I tried to take notes. The voluntary versus ordinance, I'll start at the end. This is a program that we would be developing with an ordinance. It would be enforceable. So I want to make clear, this would not be a voluntary program. The use of the word voluntary, I said it wouldn't be a voluntary program, I think. And so yes, this would be a requirement, and it would carry some penalties if it was found that people were intentionally not complying with the ordinance. Your second to last point, the city is not a mortgage banker, that we're not going into the business of lending money. Actually, for affordable housing, the challenge is that the rents that are charged, that need to be charged to make the standard of 30% of a resident's income, no more than 30% of their gross income being spent on rent plus a reasonable utility allowance. That's the standard. That means that the rents charged are not sufficiently high to cover the full cost of either building a new project or buying and rehabbing an existing project. And so that's actually precisely what cities, states, and other public entities do. They lend money in order to make those low rents possible. And the repayment terms are extremely flexible. And so that is how we have any affordable housing here. we have lent many dollars in the past, and we're lucky to have been able to do that. So, and then your first point was that the city purchasing practices does not benefit any type of provider. I think that was your point. And I wanted to point out that when the city procures consulting services, for instance, or any other contract, like somebody who's going to pave a road, there are priorities in the bidding documents that do benefit women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and local businesses, as an example. And so the question is, why are those called out, those populations called out as priorities? It's because the city has decided that it is a sound policy objective to assist those underserved cohorts in our city as a matter of public policy, and to give them extra points in a competition where they may be competing against another firm that wouldn't earn those points. So the city does sometimes, if the reason is warranted, prefer certain groups, trying to help them get a little bit of a leg up. And that's a really good analogy, I think, that you bring up to what this program would do. And this program would benefit nonprofit, affordable purchasers, affordable housing developers as purchasers, because what they're trying to do is help stabilize the community, and it's a very hard task. So that's exactly a good analogy, I think. And then one last thing, the idea that you can't share a buyer's bid. So I think only the seller of the building would know what the qualified nonprofit bid for the building. The city is not in the middle of that transaction or that bid process. Just want to clarify that. So it is up to the owner to figure out if that's a fair bid, what the terms and conditions are, if that will, they could get a better offer on the open market. So we are not in the middle of that, and we're not collecting that information, and that's not subject to Public Records Act. None of that is true. Still private. So hopefully that helps.
And maybe just also to clarify one thing on the, on the language of voluntary and around the, ordinance. So, one thing that we want to be clear is that the owner of the property has the ultimate decision of to whom they sell. There aren't going to be any forced sales under Copa. What is mandatory, what has to be followed under Copa, and what will be enforced is to follow the process. So, and the process is to have a period at the beginning where a nonprofit can, it's the process is as we outlined, where a nonprofit has a right to express interest and make an initial offer, and to try to submit a final offer. At every point of it, the owner, the seller, makes a decision of whether or not they want to sell to the nonprofit. So there will be no forced sale.
Does the public get to vote on the ordinance?
The city council gets to vote.
That is not the public, and the public
Correct.
is footing the bill.
The city council is the body that would vote on this ordinance, like most things that go before the city council. It's not a public ballot referendum.
But it's
They're
spending
proposing.
public money, and it
That's right.
involves private property.
Yes, and the city council makes many decisions about spending public money that don't
And
have to
private
go
property.
that do not have to go to
Right.
public ballot.
Let me say, I think that's unfair and not very good policy.
And we've taken down your comments, and also if I could quickly, I think you're the person who asked, would the taxpayer funds be used to purchase property? And The answer is that these properties, to the extent they were able to be turned into affordable housing, the likely funding source the city would use, two different sources. One is commercial linkage fee revenues that developers of commercial properties would pay. And the second is Measure E transfer tax funds, which is paid by people who sell properties. That is what the city would use to subsidize the rents down to affordable levels.
Thank you. And thank you again, Ruth, for your comments and questions. Let's get Jean's question, and then we can go back into the chat and get some other questions. But Jean, if you can unmute yourself and speak your question.
Yeah. Oh, hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. And for my point, I quite, agree with the previous, speaker. This one, I think, needed to the public, because this is a lot of owners. They have a property. This is a private property, private property. I think this is the first one. I agree with this one. And the second one, I saw the slide, says that it's a 2 unit plus and a minus. So what's mean the minus? So the minus means the later on, the single family, townhouse, condo, all included or not? But
No.
remember,
No, that's just a
There
dash.
was a dash. There was a dash. I'm sorry. That was
It's
a
not a
grammatical
minus sign.
symbol.
Yeah, but I remember last time this one only, affectable about, the triplex and up. But right now it says the 2 unit and the plus minus. So I want to, clarify what's the minus mean. Looks like, the step by step. Then there's apartment building, then triplex, then duplex. The next one, it is family plus ADU, or single family plus ADU, or condo, or townhouse. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ethan.
Apologies on that, and I think that's just potentially something we need to edit for future presentations. That's a dash, not a minus sign, even though it is right after a plus sign. So I definitely understand how those two things can
Maybe use a
look
colon.
like yeah.
Just to be
look
clear, we are
related.
not, I'm sorry, we're not proposing to cover single family homes or townhomes or condos. We haven't talked about ADUs at this time. And of course, those exemptions or those carve outs. I don't know if Elizabeth wants to pull that, or Josh, pull that screen back up. Also, family inheritance properties wouldn't be covered. Properties where the owner lives on the site and has lived on the site for the last 1 year, and it's 4 units or lower. So there are a lot of, actually that slide doesn't say it, but the more detailed description says it a little bit more clearly. None of those are proposed to be covered by this. Sorry for the lack of clarity on that, or the confusion.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead, and the next person that has their hands up is Matthew Reed. You can unmute yourself, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. I have 3 quick questions, just to get them in there. The first is I'm wondering if you've thought about, or if there's structure at this point for how the community partners, which may be new to housing, purchasing, owning, managing, or the tenants who are involved in this partnership with the qualified nonprofits, develop the capacity potentially to be able to involved in this program independently. The second question that I had was actually related to Cher L's question in the chat, which was whether or not the apartment rent ordinance would supersede the jump to market for folks above 80% AMI. And given that duplexes aren't covered, whether there would be some sort of phase in or transitional period in which those rents would be increased. I know folks struggle at different levels, but it's not uncommon for households to have 3 or even for lower income wage earners, that puts them into that category, but really doesn't, the category doesn't fully capture the economic challenges that they're facing. And
Okay,
the third one
Yeah,
was
you got to
about,
slow down, Matthew. You got the
Yeah.
complex questions. So.
the third one is about funding, but I think you talked about that when it came up earlier. So it's really just those two.
Josh, do you want me to take the second one? So, I could
Go for it.
talk
go
about
for it.
part of it. So Cheryl's question about would ARO pertain to somebody who's over 80% or higher? Generally, if the project becomes restricted affordable, it comes out from under the apartment rent ordinance program. And so this is one of the reasons we're trying to recreate the limit on how high rents can be escalated in 1 year, because that's one of the real benefits to tenants, that rents could not go up more than 5% in 1 year, as long as they stay in the unit, because it will come out from under ARO and become its own, restricted affordable project. Even though the unit, that person who is over 80%, they are not going to get kicked out. They might be at 90% of area median income. Their unit would still, their initial rent is going to be right sized if it's too big of a jump to 30% of their income, right? So either their rent is high and it's more than 30% of their income, or their rent is low and it's less than 30% of their income. So whatever that is, they're going to be right sized to 30% of their income. It's probably lower than that if their income's kind of high. And then it will start, the caps would pertain. If for some reason the rent were crazy low and their income was crazy high, and that the rent jump would be, 15% in 1 year, I think that's a really good question. We might want to think about something that even the initial rent adjustment can be no more than X. So that is in the real weeds about the regulations or the lending terms that we would want to control that. Did that answer that question? I wouldn't want anybody to experience 20% jump in rent in 1 year. I don't care what they make for a living.
Yes, I just,
per year. That's just mean.
No, I appreciate that. I think
Yeah.
that the goal of not displacing people and
Right.
still getting to some level of rational fairness makes sense. I'm just not
Exactly.
sure. Okay.
Exactly. Thank you. What was your first question?
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
Sorry.
It was about how we build out, or what you're envisioning in terms of building out increased capacity over time, and how community partners and tenants involved in these partnerships would develop individual capacity to be able to participate in the program.
Josh, do you want to talk about the CDC work that we're doing briefly?
Sure, very briefly. I mean, we at the city are right now looking into program design for capacity building for nonprofit organizations to engage in this work, for there to be some level of curriculum for potential community partners and other organizations that want to get into this area of work. So it's still TBD, it's still in development, but this is something that we're thinking about and looking at.
But Matthew, I also hear you talking about the tenant engagement work. And it's something that we need to build out a little bit more, like how does the city plan to, support information sharing and tenant engagement a little bit more holistically than we've been able to do in the past. Part of that, I think, comes down to funding source. There are very few funding sources that would permit us to subsidize that kind of work. So I think the question is, like, as we think about how to support CDC development, is that part of the curriculum where these CDCs are the ones who want to develop more full range of services? Is that just part of those few organizations we want to help develop, or is this something that's more widespread? And is that something that we have time to help fundraise for on a separate track? Right, because it's really philanthropy that's going to help with that, and other people's money too. But if folks have thoughts about that, we would love to hear that, more ideas about that, because I think that's a whole system that we need to talk about too.
Yeah, not necessarily right here, right now, but
No.
it is something that,
Separately.
separately, that we're interested in as well.
Thanks. Elizabeth, I'm wondering if we could go back to the chat, and I know Cheryl has a lot of questions and we've owed her some answers. And so I'm wondering if we can answer a couple of Cheryl's questions.
Sure. Yeah. I think maybe we could start with the kind of the terminology of first right of refusal and first right of offer, and what that means for the seller and the owner, and if that's included or not, and who has, who, in terms of who's got the final say.
Yeah, can I say something? And Josh, we may want to add after this. We started using the right of first refusal at the beginning of our work about 10 months ago. And we were told by people stakeholders saying, like, I'm a real estate professional and a right of first refusal entails more than what you're talking about, basically. And we didn't want to be confusing. So we changed that terminology that other cities that are developing these programs actually are still using, because we didn't want to denote that somebody's property would be available to a given party at a given price, and it was theirs to say yes or no to at that given price, and that the property was all theirs for the taking for a period of time. That is not what we mean. What we mean is that there would be a process whereby somebody had the right to make a first offer. And so we really should not be using right of first refusal whatsoever. And so to the extent that our working group heard that phrase early on, we apologize if that was at all confusing. We are only talking about the right to make a first offer. Does that help, Cheryl?
Well, my suggestion would be that you take it off of your website, because your website that you've put out, people right now who are reviewing this and participating in these meetings, it says right of first refusal on your website. So I would
Is that on the diagram?
It's in the
No,
draft.
it's in the verbiage.
In the draft.
Oh,
Yeah, I emailed you.
I so appreciate you
I sent
pointing that
you an
out.
email and I copied it, the verbiage, into the email to
I
us.
so appreciate you pointing that out. And I don't know if Jenny's here, but I also want to acknowledge Jenny Zhao for pointing out that the diagram we had posted also was a little misleading or confusing on the website versus what we were saying versus what that language said. And I really want to thank you, because you're helping us get our materials to match what we're trying to mean. So thank you. Okay, so we're going to look for that.
I still have another question whenever you're done.
Please. Is that okay, Elizabeth?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so one thing, yeah, I appreciate that you answered about the over income tenants, because, somebody could be making, paying $1,900 in rent, and maybe it's a person who has a really high income. And if you just moved it up to 30%, I mean, they could potentially have their rent go up to $3,000 a month overnight, So I think it's important that nobody lose any protections. And even if they're over income and you want to get them higher, that you still don't exceed the 5% or whatever the apartment rent ordinance is for those people, because then they're losing nobody should lose protections that they currently have, is my thinking.
Thanks for that comment.
Okay. And then the other thing is about, I know you had responded a little bit to this. So my understanding is that during the 15-day notification period, it would basically, from what I understand, it will probably be illegal for property owners to put up a for sale sign or advertise their property for sale on the MLS, or to verbally solicit offers from people. And then if the nonprofit also says, hey, after the 15 days that we do want to make an offer, so now you have to wait up to 25 more days, that at that time, it will still most likely be illegal for the owner to advertise or market their property, put up a for sale sign, put on the MLS, talk to people about getting an offer, et cetera. And based on your response, it sounds like those activities or some similar set of activities will be illegal, but the general public will not know the specifics until after the ordinance is passed. And then you put that into the actual regulation and say what those specific activities are. So to me, I think it's important for the public and property owners to know up front that these actions are most likely going to be illegal. It's going to be a
Right.
crime. It's going to be illegal to put a for sale sign in front of your property or to possibly even discuss with a potential buyer, have a discussion about how much you want or potential offer and things like that, that these forms of communication are probably going to be made illegal. I think it's important. And like you said, 10% of the sellers after the, so it'd be illegal for all of them in the 15 days. And then the 10% who do say, hey, we want to make an offer, it would be illegal for those 10%. I think it's very
They're
important
waiting.
that effectively a crime is being, a new crime is being,
Right. Well,
It's-
misdemeanor.
I think
It's not, it's probably, I mean, it's a finable offense.
It's a
Um,
fine. It's a misdemeanor. It's a
Yeah.
little, it's a
it could be
penalty.
a misdemeanor. It's illegal. It's a crime.
Yeah, but it's
Oh,
not.
crime. It's still.
That sounds harsh, the crime part, but, and I want to say that, you know, that we talked about this in the working group about that differentiation between considering one offer and then the idea that should no marketing be done or would marketing be allowed? And I feel like that is something that if people feel strongly that early marketing should be done, even though they realize that they would only be able to take an offer or entertain an offer, receive an offer, solicit an offer from just the qualified nonprofits during a given period, you know, we're open to that feedback. I have to
Well,
say, again,
yeah.
I want to emphasize that the proposal that's up for public comment right now, we are very open to hearing like, well, if you change this a little bit, that would make it a lot better for us. I know that folks like Ruth who hate the whole idea, you know, I think that's a little harder to accommodate, but you know, if that's one of the points that maybe we should be able to do certain things while we're waiting, but just not take an offer, I would love to hear that feedback because.
Well, yeah, because part of my thing is this. I mean, free speech is protected under the Constitution, and free speech includes commercial free speech, which is the right to advertise. Okay, so, you know, it is a violation of the Constitution, in my opinion, to tell people that their right to commercial free speech is not allowed. Okay. Now, I'm sure there's, you know, various reasons, and the city could say, well, it's for the better good of everybody, so it's okay for us to violate that because it's the better good of our community or blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
Right.
our lawyer's very comfortable that what we would be doing is completely legal. Yeah.
Right. So I just have a big problem with people's free speech, commercial free speech being violated.
Mhm.
That's, I have a real big problem with that. You know, basically, if you even, you know, like I said, that you can't put up a sign that your property's for sale. I mean, for God's sake, what is this world coming to? You know?
Well, or the coming soon even, isn't that what the realtors use? Like on the MLS, like
They
it's
say
coming soon or?
Yeah, well, they might do coming soon and then they do for sale now, depending on the stage they're
Yeah.
at, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, but they get to pick. If they're ready and they want it, they pick what they're going to put on that sign. They're not,
Mhm.
the government doesn't dictate what you can put on a sign in your yard as far as selling the property. So I have a real big problem with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Cheryl. Let's go maybe to one more question we had in the chat. This is from Steve. And it's kind of gets to the base, you know, the basics of the program. It says, why have this program when anyone can participate in purchasing a property when it's listed? And his follow-up question is He's refusing to sell to a nonprofit discrimination. I'm wondering if Josh, you would be able to answer this.
Refusing to sell to a nonprofit is not, I don't think would be, on the face of it, wouldn't be discrimination. You know, if refusing to sell to a nonprofit was pretext for just, you know, not wanting to have any housing go towards somebody who is a member of a protected class under fair housing law, you know, that would be discrimination. But in and of itself, refusing to sell to a nonprofit is not, you know, illegal discrimination. You know, in terms of why do this when, you know, properties are available on the market, I think that this is something, you know, that Kristen and whoever else on CSJ staff, City of San Jose staff can add in to, but I'll take the first attempt. So one thing is that while, you know, it's 1 to 4 unit properties are pretty good to be on the market and available to for everybody to see what's for sale because of the MLS and because of a lot of the professional rules that realtors have created for themselves. You know, they're all, you know, 1 to 4 unit properties are you know, readily available, you know, readily, you can see what's for sale on the MLS for 1 to 4 unit properties. For commercial residential properties, 5 units and up, there is no requirement that they be listed, and many are traded, you know, without being listed, pocket listings between brokers, you know, between clients of brokers, within brokerages, and not very, you know, and there's not a lot of transparency. So one thing, and this is not the determinative or only reason, but one reason is that, you know, that for certain properties, there's not a lot of transparency, and it is hard to know what's on the market. The other thing is that these, you know, a lot of times, well, one step back, I used to, in another life, I used to develop affordable housing. I used to work for a nonprofit affordable housing developer, and you know, I bought quite a few properties, you know, on the open market to develop as affordable housing, including some smaller properties for you know, that were residential, you know, existing residential that we did as preservation projects. And, you know, and so I definitely know that it is possible to be on the open market and to buy properties and develop them as affordable housing. It is really difficult, especially in a market that is as hot as ours is, where things trade so fast. And so, you know, there's not a lot of time for nonprofits to be able to make their pitch to the sellers. And like, one of the things that I always felt was, if I could get in front of a seller and show show them that this is something that, you know, we'd done before, that our financing was good, it was a little bit slower, we paid fair market value on our acquisitions, you know, I had a lot better chance of being able to close the transaction. So this does create a process where it puts a foot in the door for a nonprofit buyer. There's no obligation to sell to that nonprofit buyer, but you know, there's a foot in the door. The nonprofit buyer gets a foot in the door, and you know, we think that that's something appropriate given our market. We think and given the goals that we're trying to accomplish here, and the people that we're trying to serve. So, I think that, those are partial answers to your question. There's additional reasons, and other folks can chime in with some of them, but those are a couple that I think are important.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's too much
Yeah, I
more to add.
agree. And I know we've got a lot of other questions in the chat and comments, and we're running close on time. Cheryl, I see a question from David Eisbach, who said that he's asked several times and wants clarification on something. Do you think we can go to that question at 2:19 p.m.?
Yeah, thank you, Kristen.
Hi, David.
Let me ask this one question to begin my question. And that is, if we're talking 30% of an income in the low range, give me the figures, the actual numbers. Now, what is the income of the lowest number, the lowest earners? Is that what you want? Is that what you're aiming for, the lowest earners income wise, as far as their rents go?
We're aiming for people between technically 31% and 80% of area median. I don't know, Josh, if you've got those income levels handy.
I will have it in just a few seconds, and I'll link to it in the
And
chat.
so your question about the city's risk?
Yes. Well, the point is, regardless of the city's position in buying the property, if they make a loan and there's a default on the loan, the QNR NP doesn't work out, the city's on the hook, or it lets the property go. I'm not so much worried at this point, but I need a clarification on the actual running. Now, I have, I'm in property management and so on. And I would tell you that that roughly $2,500 for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit in a duplex is pretty much what's going on. I know that housing gets figures as high as $3,000 a month, but I think the older properties, which are under rent control, are in that category. So if you look at that as a kind of a metric, let's say that a duplex goes for $1,200,000, and you put $240,000 down, and you're financing $950,000. If you are doing it that way, your monthly payment, principal and interest, is going to be $4,257. Your insurance is going to come in at $120 a month, and the taxes would be roughly $2,000. Of course, you're not going to pay taxes. So if we add that up, the 63 at management, for units that are small like that, you would expect something around 9% for management. And so that would come to $450 a month, roughly. And maintenance, again, we're talking in the price range that you're more than likely going after. Older units, which the rule of thumb on that is it takes about 30% of what the income is that you are going to be faced with as far as repairs go. Roofs go, plumbing goes, everything goes, and you're constantly paying. And so I'm giving that just $1,000. So we're looking at a basically a rent, what is coming out of your pocket as an owner, about 70, let's just say $7,500 or $7,800 a month. And that's not paying the taxes. All right. Now, that's the reason that I was asking, what is the rent? Now, I was assuming that they're paying $2,500 rent. If you give me that, what your range is, the 30%, what is that going to be? Pick a middle number. If you want to make it high, go ahead, or even low. I don't care.
And maybe
I mean,
Josh can type that out in the chat with a range of incomes and the attendant range of rents. Maybe that'd help.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Sorry, David, I
actually,
know.
then my question is simple. If the rent that is going to be paid, if the 2,500 is too high, and let's just cut it in half if you want. All right. Let's say it's $1,200. If it's $1,200 and you times 2, let's say the next door neighbor has the same, that's $2,400, and the outgo on it without any extravagance or anything else is going to be about $7,800, and your times 12, it's 1,200. So five. That's all right. We'll just say 5,000 times 12.
David, I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. We've got a many number of people with their hands up, and I think
Okay.
we've got Josh. So if you could just get to your question.
I'll just close it this way. You're going to be eating $5,000 a month.
Yeah,
You're
I
gonna
think
be
David's
doing
point is
that.
you've
Now,
got to
where
cover
does-
costs, right?
The point is, where does that money come from?
So
Who's
yeah,
paying the bill? That's
Okay.
my question. Thank
got
you.
it. So David's point is well taken, that no matter who buys this building, no matter if they're for profit or nonprofit, no matter whether they're trying to, maximize rents or not, operating costs have to get covered. And Josh put in the chat a rent that's 30% on a 1-bedroom, which is quite low, which shows, and hope maybe you could put in the high rent, which shows that at the low end, the rents are quite low, so that while the city can accept flexible repayment terms, if the rents still are, if there's no tax credit equity coming in, if there's no additional support that helps augment what the small rent that's paid in order to cover costs, as David's saying, the project's not going to work. And so that's the challenge with preservation,
Well,
which is that you still have to charge rents that cover
Yeah.
the costs of operating the property.
Well, you
That's
see,
going to look different on every property.
the question is there going to be subsidies? There has to be subsidies, and where's it coming from? Yeah, thank you.
This,
Thanks, David.
Thank you,
Yeah, he
David.
points out the challenge of doing preservation monetarily, and operating subsidies may or may not be able to be coupled with the capital subsidies. So again, the range of income levels, all rents won't be $850. The range of income levels together will have to cover operating costs, including debt service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to know we have 6 people with their hands up, and in the meetings past we've stayed over, and we already 5 minutes over, so we will continue. We'll stay and continue to answer questions. I just want to, people have to drop off. I just want to thank you for coming. I did put a meeting survey in the chat. We will be having one more. We'll be having a few more meetings, but the next one in the similar format will be next Wednesday at 4 o'clock. And so we'll get to Jenny. Oh shoot, looks like Norma dropped off. Jenny, Mina, and then Martha. So Jenny, if you could go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. I have a comment and also a question. So Josh just said was 100% correct. We are in a very competitive market. Not only just the nonprofits are facing that, so as people like a lot of folks here who live in San Jose would like to invest in San Jose. Also, we are facing the uphill battle trying to get a property. So this program is trying to design to give a special group a privilege in this competitive market. It is not a forced sale, as you just mentioned. However, it is a forced process that allows someone to see all the other bids. It does give a big advantage. And Christine just mentioned, the city thinks it's properly to do that, to give a certain group a advantage. For example, in the public work bid. Well, that's right, it's public work bid. However, here the target is private property that owned by 100% by the private. It's not a city-owned land. So I think there's a difference here. Then my question is, I'm on the mailing list or the distribution list of a lot of housing topics that sends out by housing department. But however, I didn't get the notice for this meeting, the outreach meeting. So I'm just wondering, what distribution list are you using? And will all the related parties, for example, all the rental property owners, are they notified? I'm sure the city have that list, or if not all, but the most of the list, right? So are they notified? And also those meetings are designed during the day, during the work day and work hours. I mean, a lot of folks, they don't have the luxury to attend those meetings. Right. And what's your plan to do the further outreach?
Right. So maybe, and thanks, Jenny, for those thoughts. Elizabeth may be able to talk about what groups this notice went out to. So actually what you're talking about, Jenny, is two things I wanted to comment on. One, we are about to send out a list, and the city has a policy because some folks complained that we can't send out notices that folks did not request. So I can't send out to the ARO landlords a bunch of information that they never requested. And so we were told we were given clearance to send one notice out to them saying, please sign up for this list so you can get notices of Copa meetings. And that's just about to go out. And then the second point that you bring up is exactly why we would love to set up a meeting with your members, with you at a time that you think is reasonable, so that we can help to reach a lot of folks that we know really would like to learn about this program proposal, and make sure we answer people's questions so that they understand what it is and what it's not.
Thank you, Christine. We don't have all the ARU landlords list, but I think you have, and this is something that's going to impact them a lot.
Right, I agree. So I really wanted to do that, and I was told that it's against city new policy because people had complained.
But the thing is, how people know this exists? How people know this is coming? People don't know until you tell them.
It's really through this, I mean, yes, agreed. And it's through the stakeholder organizations like yours to let your members know. It's also all of the meetings are posted to our website, to the housing department website. We had a news flash that went out also. So if they look at the news, like news briefs for the city, they could be on that list. And Elizabeth did get this e-blast for this meeting, and then the next one sent out to several hundred folks. And I really apologize if somehow you weren't on that list.
Yeah, I didn't receive your notice, and quite frankly,
you were on our working
Jenny,
group.
Yeah, Jenny, I can just touch base with you offline about that, because you certainly should have received that. So there might be something going on maybe with your email, but I appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's go ahead, and I think we're good. Jenny, thank you for your question. Let's move on to Mia, and then
I'm sorry. Can I say one other thing, Jenny? The thing that I talked about the city procurement process, that per Ruth's comment, was really because Ruth said city purchasing practices don't even do this. And so I just answered that directly. I agree this is about private property and what can be done with private property. And so that's why we've been very careful about designing something with a variety of stakeholders' interests in mind. And you know, there are times in which it is appropriate for the city to weigh in as to the use of private property, about the rules of the private property, like with zoning, things like that. And so our lawyers have assured us this is within the city's powers to pursue. And so I realize people may differ on their opinion as to whether it's a good idea. But that's why I use that example. So just to clarify. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay, Mina, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question if you're still there? Mina Young. She might have stepped away. Why don't we hear from Mark?
Hi,
Oh,
yes.
there you are.
Okay.
Thanks for your patience.
Sure. Okay, I hear that, you know, my question was, Copa is being considered by many different cities, and I think DC is the first one that had it a long time ago, but and San Francisco is second, I think. But then like Berkeley and East Palo Alto, they're looking into it, and they're not able to. They haven't shown any data that to support it, or you know, they haven't done the study enough to do it. I don't know how you guys got enough data to support it. DC program, what I know is my niece works there and she can't find housing and rent is really high. She's sharing with 5 people in one house. So it's not helping. Whatever program they have, it's not working. And I hear there's a lot of this extortion on the owners and destruction on the market. Somebody mentioned that the reason why you're doing it is because like 5 units or more are not being transparent, that you cannot get it on the market. But I mean, and somebody else kind of said that it's not true. Everything is on the market. You should get information by working with your real estate experts. So what is the story? What are you basing on to support this program other than to just copycat other programs? I mean, other cities that are not working.
So it sounds like you're kind of questioning like the transparency issue, if that's and how we've come up with, you know, the basis for this program or the reasoning to have it.
Yeah, I was just gonna take the first half of that question, and somebody else wants to talk about the transparency issues. As far as the data are concerned, so it really depends on sort of what exactly you're measuring. As far as the DC program, for example, is concerned, we really see that as a really successful program, especially since 2012, when the city started dedicating pretty significant amounts of subsidy in order to be able to support the program. They've been able to take about 1,500 units off the market since 2015. Obviously, that's an average of 250 to 300 units per year in a city that's 2/3 the size of San Jose. So if we were able to get to that, even that level, I think we would really look at this as potentially a really great success. If you look at the opportunity to purchase program in San Francisco, they haven't really reached that level as of yet, but my understanding is that their goal is to reach up to 1,000 units within the preservation program per year. Currently about between 100 and 150 are going through their preservation program per year. And that doesn't mean that they're going through their Copa program, that just means that they're going through their preservation program. As far as Berkeley and EPA are concerned, I would just refer you to those cities' guidelines and program reports. I do believe they've put out some pretty significant data about what they hope to see as the results for their respective programs. I'll just add one more thing. We really see Copa as being one piece of a larger ecosystem of approaches to addressing displacement and affordable housing in the city. As a lot of folks know, the mayor has a 10,000 affordable housing unit goal of an average of 2,000 affordable housing units per year. The city has a lot of existing programs to try to address both the production of affordable housing, but also the production of market rate housing in order to be able to capture, sort of the excess demand for living in San Jose. We see Copa as just being in that toolbox to address affordable housing. You really see it as a really effective way to address one specific problem that we see in San Jose, which is that a lot of folks are leaving or having to leave our city and to move out of the area, move out of state because they're no longer able to afford to live here. And one of the reasons why that is happening is because when properties go up for sale, a lot of times that is pretty conditioned around the increase of the cost of rent. And so that's kind of the thing that we're trying to address. As far as the transparency question is concerned, I would pass it to Kristen and Josh to address.
I'm saying DC has not solved the problem of affordability, whatever program they have.
Yeah.
No,
and
I think you're right. They haven't solved it, and it is an issue that a lot of different cities are grappling with. I do think that it's one of those things where you're passing programs to try and solve some part of the problem, but it's going to be much more difficult to solve the overall problem. I'll pass it back to Kristen.
Yeah, I agree with you. The affordability challenge, especially in the Silicon Valley, is huge. And Washington, D.C., compared to when I used to live there, has gone up in price so much. And a lot of it is due to neighborhoods getting completely redeveloped with high-priced apartments, gentrification happening. There's a lot of development going on there. And that means that along with that development has to be these kind of neighborhood stabilization efforts that go hand in hand with it. And it's not going to solve the whole problem, but it's a foot in the door. It's a way to at least get a little bit of traction and energy going the other way for at least a handful of people, even though it's never going to be enough because the market is so powerful and there's so many moneyed interest investing and so many units going forward, especially DC. I know it's a tough market.
I'm not sure you have looked into San Francisco, but every year, because of these very stringent rules, property owners are no longer offering their housing because they want to avoid these problems. So you're actually forcing more housing stocks to be lost because of these programs.
It's a good point that San Francisco has had this problem over time, and it's kind of associated with the their rent stabilization program or rent control, that they have more than the average number of vacant apartments sitting there, right? Rather than being transferred. I don't know about whole buildings. I had heard more about it as to people who didn't want to sell or didn't want to make their, maybe it's the small units, that may be true, like 3 or 4 units, that it was associated a lot maybe with their rent stabilization program. We had checked on that question. It's a really good question, I think, because each market's a little different. Our code enforcement department says that we do not have a very big vacant unit problem to their understanding. That is something that they verify and check on, apparently. And because I know the idea of a vacant unit tax had come up about 2 or 3 years ago as a policy idea. And if Martha is still on, Martha O'Connell, she would remember those conversations somewhat. And at that time, it was deemed not necessary because there weren't as many vacant units in San Jose as other places.
And in San Francisco, this problem predates their passing of Copa. It was not caused by Copa. It was a pre-existing. It was not caused by San Francisco's Copa. It was a pre-existing problem in San Francisco that continues.
So, just to your basic question, then I know we'll move on and we're almost at 3 o'clock, and we're staying till 3 o'clock, I guess, Catherine, after all, if Catherine's still here. The question about why Copa is a solution and why it is needed. It is true that there are more properties apparently that are 5+ units that don't get listed on any listing service and get transferred and sold within individual brokerages. And there is not just one listing service like the MLS is for 1 to 4 unit properties, but there are many different ones that are subscription based. And somebody asked, how, I think Steve had asked earlier, why don't you just have affordable developers hire brokers and, you know, look around for properties like everybody else? And that's a common question that comes up. They already do. And what Copa would do is to try to expand the number of buildings that people even know about or up for sale, and then allow folks to make fair market value offers on them. And what the city's objective is, not to ruin anybody's private property rights in any way, shape, or form, but when we're thinking about areas that are, for instance, undergoing a lot of change, it is pretty likely that some tenants are going to be in buildings that want to be bought, and those new owners who are for profit are going to want to try to raise rents significantly, and that those residents, and get the residents out one way or the other, you know, they're just not going to be able to be afforded, and that those folks won't have anywhere to be in our market, right? So what Copa would do is just open up more opportunities, as Josh said, for, you know, folks who know what they're doing to just present themselves and try to make their own pitch. And if that doesn't work, so be it. But we're trying to get some buildings preserved, turned into restricted affordable housing, develop this strategy that frankly is missing in our market altogether, and just help make people aware of opportunities in the market, and that's it. And then leave the negotiations to the parties themselves, not get in the middle of that. So that's what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Kristen. So our last questioners are Martha, Maria, and then Gustavo. So we'll try to get through to everyone, and then we'll try to answer those in the chat as we can in our last few minutes here. So Martha, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to make this real fast. It's really not a question. It's a comment. In another life, I was a 2-term chair of the Senior Commission, and I'm a little bit concerned about looking at people's incomes without considering. I don't know what the answer is. I'm just throwing out the problem. If you don't look at, particularly for seniors who are spending an inordinate amount, many of them an inordinate amount of their income on doctor copays and medicines and all that, and you just look at their income, they might be pressured or something, incentivized to move out. So I just wanted to bring that issue up so the city can keep that in mind when you're looking at incomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Martha.
Maria.
Thank you. I had a couple comments and also some questions. Some of the comments were the fact that you guys did go a little bit later than we were expecting, and we did have some Spanish speakers only. And since we don't have translations, those community cannot give their comments or their opinions on this. So it would be great if these are going to be extended to everyone, that they should have that right also, and that translation should be extended, especially if this is going to happen again, just to be considerate for everyone. And then if we have these comments, it would be great to get through people who have not spoken, and the people who have like raised their hands again to speak for a second or third time, they should wait at the end. And my question was that if the renters who are actually there, are they going to be spoken about what is happening? I'm not sure if this was spoken about, but are the renters, because I think that's the majority of the issue is, I think is for these renters to have a place to stay, for them to be able to stay there, to stay in San Jose, because I think that's the huge issue, is that people are leaving San Jose. Our community is not staying in San Jose because of the rents escalating so high, and that they're not able to find anywhere to stay. So are the renters going to be able to find a way, like, are they going to be told about this before the nonprofit? Are they going to be told with the nonprofit is told? And what is the inclusion of those renters? And will they be able to even make a purchase themselves if they're able to?
Thank you. Yeah, so it sounds like your question is about communication with the renters and kind of what their role will be in the process. And if there's, if they're going to have the ability to do purchasing themselves. So I'll queue up somebody to answer that question, but I just want to acknowledge your comments about the interpretation. You're correct. We should certainly, plan better for that since this has happened before. So noted that we will make sure that we have our interpreters stay for the entirety of the program, and that that's the right and fair thing to do. So thank you for calling that out. So Josh, would you be able to speak to the question about Tenant?
Or I think Asen had unmuted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think basically there are two open questions, and I'd love to hear folks' thoughts and suggestions on what the best time to notify tenants is. In, for example, the version that Berkeley and the EPA are currently developing, obviously those are tenant opportunity to purchase. I'm sorry, the one in Berkeley is a tenant opportunity to purchase, the one in EPA is an opportunity to purchase program. They are going to be sending the notices for sale right at the moment of the notice of sale. So it goes to the qualified nonprofits, but it also goes to the tenants. We haven't included that in the current draft framework for San Jose, primarily because we looked at the San Francisco example where the notice only goes to the qualified nonprofits. And because the timeline in San Francisco is really short, really don't see the ability of tenants to be able to really have much of a say, especially if the qualified nonprofits do not put in a notice, a statement of interest. And so I think potentially one of the things we could be looking at is having the notification go out to tenants once there is a qualified nonprofit that actually puts in a statement of interest. At that point, then the conversation really actually begins. And that way you don't end up in a situation in which anytime there is a notice of sale, the notice goes to tenants, the nonprofit doesn't put in a statement of interest, and then there's nothing that can be done after 15 days. But I'd love to hear from Kristen and Josh if they have other thoughts on that.
I'm sorry, I was answering questions in the chat at that time. Oh, Josh has another comment.
I'm good. Yeah, so I mean, I think that probably would be the best way, but definitely would love to hear that as well.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Gustavo, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, my name is Gustavo Flores. I'm part of Vecinos Activos with Somos My Fair. I don't have a question. Actually, I have a comment. For the past hour and a half, I've been listening everyone to talk about money, about misdemeanors, about if it's correct or not, but I haven't listened no one to talk about the impact this can have on the families inside of our community. So this problem is not only about money, it's also about community, it's also about families. My problem, I'm the person who can be displaced. I'm appointed to be displaced from San Jose, and if it is happen, I'm gonna have to leave my 2 daughters in San Jose, and this is happening to me. So I think the people here is talking only about money and about issues, and nobody is talking about the families, about the community. So I do have questions. I will wait for the next time to do them, but right now I just want to remind everyone to please put attention also in the impact it can have on the families and all the people around. And thank you very much. And I hope I can see you everyone next meeting.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
thank
Gustavo.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Gustavo.
Thank you so much for that. Gustavo.
Okay, so I'm going to put the website up in the chat. So if, we're working on getting some updated FAQs and, taking in everyone's questions and comments during this public review period. So we appreciate those coming in. And I'll also put the survey. So if you could, for this meeting, if you could fill that out, that would be really helpful. And before we sign off, I'd just like to thank everyone again for coming. And, I vow to do better with meeting management and our timing. And
Can you hear me?
Marnie, I can hear you.
Okay, I typically save the chat at after this, and somehow I can't save the chat. How do I save the chat? Because there are a lot of links in here.
Okay, that's a good point. I'm not sure. I'm able to save the chat, but I'm not sure that you are able to save the chat because I'm a host of the meeting. So
Can
I'm
you
not, I
save
don't,
the chat and send it to me?
I think I can. Yeah.
I mean, you
can
have
do
my
that.
email, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
do that,
I'm sorry
Marnie.
to have interrupted you. The chat goes away once it closes. So I wanted to let you know that. There may
Okay.
be other people who save chats as well.
Okay. Yeah,
Thank you.
appreciate that. And we are just on our website, we are saving the slide decks from each presentation, and we're getting recordings put up as well. So Marnie, I'll make sure to get you that chat. Okay, so again, thank you all for coming. I'll hand it over to Josh, Asen, or Kristen if you want to say anything in closing.
No, I think the only thing thank you so much again for coming. I think there's going to be is it one more meeting or two more meetings?
Yeah, we have one more
going
scheduled
on?
for next Wednesday at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, and then I think hopefully once we have the details worked out, we'll also have a Vietnamese only meeting as well. I just want to say again, thanks for coming. I really appreciate the questions. Really appreciate Gustavo's last comment about sort of the impact, and we're trying to make sure that we're foregrounding that a little bit better next time.
Yeah, I also appreciate Gustavo for bringing us back to why we have been working on anti-displacement strategies for I don't know, the last 2.5 years, about creating what the strategy should be, finally getting the council to say, go ahead with the work, and then working on this particular initiative for the last, I would say, 10 months. It has been a long time coming, and I know that that is forever in a community that is experiencing stress of displacement every day and people being separated from their families. So again, thank you for the reality dose of how urgent this work is today. And I do want to say that, we believe restricted affordable housing is as good as it gets. It is really hard to do, and it takes public subsidy, and it takes kind of extraordinary efforts. And that's one of the things that this program is trying to help support, is the creation of restricted affordable housing. And so we appreciate your feedback as to why this program, which is the first big preservation program we've tried to put together, it's not going to be everybody's favorite program, but it is something that we think that could be really helpful in having us try to get more preservation projects, especially in certain key areas at different times, to move forward. So we really appreciate your comments, and we are making notes of that. One other thing I wanted to say, that this is a public comment period. We started it in early December. The more detailed description of what we are proposing to council, or what we are proposing to propose to council, has been on our website since the 1st of December. We're leaving it up there. The comment period goes through February 1st. We are planning to go to Housing Commission with a proposal, get their feedback in February, and to go to the council committee, the Community Economic Development Committee, at the end of February to get their feedback too. So those are public meetings. Everybody's welcome at those meetings. But really, whether we have public meetings like this before then, and I'm hoping that we have more than just one. We're going to try to get 2 more scheduled this month, not just one more. That you feel free to send us your written thoughts and comments if you have not already. So we invite your feedback, good and bad, and also how something could be a little bit more palatable to you if you are having issues with something in particular. So we really thank you for your engagement and your interest in this. And if Jenny is still here, I think she may have gone. We're looking for more engagement. There she is. Hi, Jenny. With small property owners, and we're going to work with you directly on that, Jenny. So thanks. And that's it for today. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
So everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you.